Hey there, fellow coders. I'm Adam, and this is GosuCoders. Today, we're talking about my top 5 JavaScript interview questions. These are things you must know. Let's get started. Question 1. Tell me all of the ways to declare a variable in JavaScript. You should answer that with the normal way, which is just var. And you should also be able to add on some interesting information on that, like how that is scoped. Make sure that you understand that var, let, and const have different scopes. And if you want to know more about that, please check out my anatomy of a for loop video to give you more insight on it. But the answer to this would be var, let, and const. Now, let and const are fairly new to the JavaScript world, so those are ones that are typically asked to understand if people are keeping up to date with JavaScript. Let has a narrower life. Constant has a narrower life, but const also doesn't allow that variable to be edited, like added to or changed, which is also really helpful. And you should be able to add that on in your interview. All right, question 2 is, what is a closure? You will be surprised how many people don't know the answer to this. But you can think of a closure, and you should really be able to give an example of this. But imagine you have a function. Maybe that function is just called main. And inside that function, you have 3 variables. They're like var a, var b, var c. But now you actually have, inside that main function, you have another function. That function might be like run or process or something like that. A closure is basically an inner function that allows you to access variables defined within itself, within its parent function, and global variables. This is one that you should be able to talk about in depth and really understand what you have access to depending on where a function is defined. Very important for you to know, and that's why it's my question number 2. All right, my question 3 is, what's the difference between the equal operator and the equal operator? And it's a really simple answer. The 3 equal sign operator is going to be a lot stricter. So if you're comparing two variables that are the same, but yet of different types, for example, it's going to return false. So a lot of times in JavaScript, for example, the comparison will take some liberties if you just use the 2 equal signs. So for example, it might convert, intrinsically it might convert in the comparison one type to another to verify that they're the same. If you want to be strict, you use the 3 equal signs. And actually, I would recommend, in most cases, you probably want to use the 3 equal signs. But that's a good way to answer the question, and that's why that's my number 3. My question number 4 is about promises. And this one goes a little bit outside of JavaScript, but they are so important to any JavaScript developer. So the question typically would be framed something like, can you describe to me what a promise is and when you would use that? Now, a promise is something that basically is like a contract that you're fulfilling. So you're returning an object back to the program that's running it, and it's going to be listening and waiting for that contract to be complete. The queue library, for example, is a great place to start for documentation on promises. And honestly, if you think about promises as something, as like a cleaner way to do callbacks, right? You don't know when things are going to complete in the future. I'm trying to get some information down from the web. I don't know, maybe it's going to take me a second to get that back. So instead of stalling the program at that point, I return a promise object, and then I listen for an event on that promise object when that promise has been completed. Now, that promise could also be rejected. There could be some sort of error that happens, and that also needs to be handled. Promises are a pretty big topic to get into, but I would highly recommend you going into any interview, especially if you're going to be doing JavaScript development, understanding promises. Question 5. This one may seem like a trick question at first, but it's really simple. You may get asked, define the 2 types of functions that you can use in JavaScript. And those are actually fairly easy. You have named functions. So those are functions you declare and can be called from whatever scope that they're accessible. Then you have a concept called anonymous functions, and those are only accessible at the time that they're ran. So for example, a lot of times callbacks or promise listeners or anything like that might just be anonymous because you only need it to be there when that code is actually executed. So those are the two types of functions that you can have. And that's all I've got today. Hopefully these 5 questions help you as you go out and try to ace the JavaScript interview. Anyway, if you've enjoyed this, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe. That would mean the world to me. And please check back tomorrow for more programming related topics. Until then, keep coding, coders.